The dust tasted like iron and desperation, as 19-year-old Hannah Sawyer collapsed against the sun-bleached fence post just outside Sloan, Nevada, her lips cracked and bleeding from 3 days without water. The year was 1878, and the small mining town shimmered in the distance like a mirage, so close yet impossibly far for someone who could barely lift her head anymore. She had walked from Carson City after burying her father beside the road, his body finally giving out to the consumption that had hollowed him from the inside, leaving her with nothing but the tattered dress on her back and memories of a childhood that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Her mother had died bringing her into this world, and now her father had left it, taking with him the last thread connecting her to anything resembling family. Hannah's fingers dug into the hot sand, trying to find purchase, trying to find a reason to stand up one more time. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she thought perhaps it would be easier to simply close her eyes and let the desert claim her too. That was when she heard the horse. The sound of hooves on packed earth came slowly, deliberately, and Hannah forced her eyes open to see a figure approaching on a paint horse, the animal's coat gleaming with health and careful grooming. The rider sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow, and for a moment Hannah wondered if death itself had come to collect her, riding out from the Nevada wasteland. The man dismounted in one fluid motion before his horse had fully stopped, hitting the ground with boots that had seen hard miles but were well maintained. He was at her side in 3 long strides, and Hannah found herself looking up into a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, maybe 24 or 25, with eyes the color of the sky just after dawn. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady as he uncapped his canteen. "Easy. Not too fast or you'll be sick." Hannah tried to speak to thank him, but her throat was too dry. He supported her head with one hand, calloused but gentle, and tipped the canteen to her lips. The water was warm but tasted better than anything she had ever known. She wanted to gulp it down, but he pulled it away after a few sips. I know," he said, reading the desperation in her eyes. "But we have to go slow. You've been out here a while by the looks of it." "My father," Hannah managed to croak out. "He died 3 days ago, maybe 4. I buried him by the road." The man's expression shifted, something profound moving behind those dawn-colored eyes. He gave her another sip of water, then another, before sitting back on his heels to study her properly. "You've been walking since then?" Hannah nodded, the simple motion making her head swim. "Had nowhere else to go. Thought maybe Sloan. Thought maybe I could find work." "Where's your family, your people?" The question hit harder than the sun had. Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and unwanted. "Don't have any, never did. Just my father, and now he's gone too." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he seemed to wrestle with something internal. Then he stood, making a decision that Hannah could see settle over him like a coat. He offered her his hand, strong and sure. "You do now," he said, and there was nothing casual in his tone, nothing light or unconsidered. "I'm your family from this day on." Hannah stared at him, certain the sun had finally addled her brain beyond reason. "You don't even know me." "Name's Colton Pierce," he said, hand still extended. "I run a horse ranch about 5 miles west of here. Inherited it from my uncle 2 years back. It's not much, but it's honest work and honest living. I could use help with the books and the household, and you look like you could use a place to be." "I don't understand," Hannah whispered. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Colton's expression grew distant for a moment, shadows crossing his features. "Because 5 years ago I was alone too. My parents died of cholera, my brother was killed in a mining accident, and I had nothing." Uncle James found me half-starved in Virginia City and took me in without a second thought. He taught me that family isn't just blood, it's choice. He passed last winter, and before he died, he made me promise something. He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He made me promise that if I ever found someone who needed help the way I once did, I'd pay forward what he gave me. So that's what I'm doing. That's what you're getting. A choice to live and a place to call home. Hannah's hand trembled as she reached up to take his. His fingers closed around hers with a warmth that had nothing to do with the Nevada sun, and he pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. She swayed, and he steadied her with his free hand at her waist. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I used to," she said, "when I was younger. Before we lost everything." "Good enough." Colton led her to his horse, a beautiful paint stallion with intelligent eyes. "This is Justice. He's steady and he won't give you trouble." He mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. Hannah had just enough strength to wrap her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his worn cotton shirt. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and even, and something about that simple rhythm convinced her this was real, not a fever dream conjured by a dying mind. They rode slowly toward Sloan, but instead of heading into town, Colton guided Justice west along a worn trail that cut through scrub brush and scattered juniper. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that hurt to look at in their beauty. Hannah had almost forgotten the world could be beautiful. "Tell me about your father," Colton said as they rode, his voice carrying back to her. "What was he like?" Hannah leaned her cheek against his back, too tired to hold herself upright anymore. "He was a clerk, a good one. We lived in San Francisco when I was little. He worked for a shipping company, and we had a nice house with real glass windows and a garden my mother planted before she died. But then there was the financial panic in '73, and the company went under. After that, we just sort of drifted. He tried mining, farming, anything he could find. The consumption started about 2 years ago. He fought it hard, but it just kept taking more and more of him until there was nothing left to take." "I'm sorry," Colton said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "That's a heavy burden for someone to carry alone." "What about you?" Hannah asked, wanting to focus on anything besides her own grief. "What's it like running a horse ranch?" She could feel him shift slightly in the saddle, his shoulders relaxing a bit. "Challenging." Uncle James had a real gift with horses, could gentle the wildest Mustang and turn it into an animal that would trust you with its life. "I'm still learning, still figuring out half of what he tried to teach me. But there's something right about it, you know. Taking these wild creatures and showing them that not all humans mean harm, building that trust, that partnership. It's honest work." They crested a rise, and Hannah saw the ranch spread out below them. It was modest, nothing grand but well-maintained. A sturdy wooden house with a covered porch, a large barn that looked relatively new, several corrals with horses moving lazily in the cooling evening air, and a few outbuildings she couldn't identify in the fading light. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised her. "Is someone else there?" she asked. "Just old Tom," Colton said. "He's a retired ranch hand, must be close to 70 now. Mostly he keeps to himself in the smaller cabin out back, but he likes to make sure I have a hot meal waiting when I come back from town runs or supply trips. He can't do the hard work anymore, but he's got wisdom I'd be a fool not to listen to." As they approached, a weathered man with a shock of white hair emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a cloth. His eyes went wide when he saw Hannah sitting behind Colton, but he was too experienced to let surprise show for more than a moment. "Found her collapsed outside Sloan," Colton said as he dismounted, then reached up to help Hannah down. Her legs nearly buckled, and both men moved to steady her. She needs food, water, and rest. Her father died a few days back. She has no family. Old Tom studied Hannah with eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge anyone for their circumstances. Then it's a good thing you found her. I made stew. There's plenty. He looked at Colton with something approving in his expression. Your uncle would have done the same. That's what I figured, Colton said. He turned to Hannah, his hand still supporting her elbow. Come on, let's get you inside and fed, then we'll figure out the rest. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with wooden furniture that showed skilled craftsmanship and care. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a large table sat in the center of the main room. The air smelled of wood smoke and cooking meat, and Hannah's stomach cramped with sudden desperate hunger. Colton guided her to a chair, and she sank into it gratefully. Old Tom ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread and a cup of water. Slowly, he cautioned, echoing Colton's earlier warning. Your stomach won't thank you for rushing. Hannah forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to shovel the food down. The stew was simple, venison and vegetables, but it was the best thing she had tasted in months. As she ate, she became aware of Colton and Old Tom speaking quietly near the door. She's staying then? Old Tom asked. Yes, Colton said firmly. She can have the spare room upstairs. It's clean and there's a bed frame. I'll need to get a proper mattress from town, but for tonight we can make do with blankets. You sure about this, son? Taking in a stranger, a young woman no less. People will talk. Let them talk, Colton said. She needs help and we have the means to provide it. That's all that matters. Old Tom chuckled softly. You're more like James every day. He'd be proud. When Hannah had finished eating, moving more slowly as her stomach began to feel uncomfortably full after so long empty, Colton showed her upstairs. There were 3 rooms on the second floor. One was clearly his, with a large bed and personal belongings scattered about. Another was storage, packed with trunks and equipment. The third was empty save for a bed frame and a small dresser. I know it's not much, Colton said, sounding almost apologetic. But it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. I'll get blankets to make up a bed, and tomorrow I'll ride into Sloan for a proper mattress and whatever else you need. This is more than I had this morning, Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. This is more than I dared hope for. She turned to face him, this stranger who had become her salvation in the span of a few hours. Why are you really doing this? The truth. Colton leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful in the lamplight he carried. The truth. Because I remember what it felt like to have nothing and no one. I remember thinking I'd rather die than keep going. And I remember how much it meant when someone saw me as worth saving, even when I didn't see it myself. Uncle James gave me purpose when I had none. He showed me what family really means. And I guess I believe that what we put into the world comes back to us somehow. If I can be for you what he was for me, then maybe his death meant something more than just leaving me this ranch. Hannah felt tears spill down her cheeks and she didn't try to stop them. I'll work hard. I'll earn my keep, I promise. I know you will, Colton said gently, but tonight you just need to rest. Everything else can wait for tomorrow. He brought her a stack of blankets and helped her arrange them into a makeshift bed. The simple act of making a place to sleep felt impossibly intimate, though nothing improper passed between them. When he bid her good night and closed the door, Hannah lay down on the blankets and stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been dying in the desert. Tonight she was in a bed in a house with a full stomach and a cowboy who had promised to be her family. She didn't understand it, couldn't quite believe it, but she was too exhausted to do anything but surrender to sleep. When Hannah woke, Sunlight was streaming through the small window, and for a moment she panicked, thinking she had overslept, that she would be scolded for laziness. Then memory returned, and with it the surreal events of the previous day. She sat up slowly, her body aching from too many days of hard travel and deprivation, and listened to the sounds of the house around her. Voices drifted up from below, Colton and old Tom discussing the day's work. She heard the clink of dishes, the scrape of chairs, the ordinary sounds of morning in a working household. Hannah stood on shaky legs and looked down at her dress. It was filthy and torn, barely decent anymore. She had nothing else to wear. A soft knock on her door made her turn. "You awake?" Colton called through the wood. "Yes," Hannah said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. "May I come in? I have something for you." She opened the door to find him holding a bundle of clothing. "These were my mother's," he said, meeting her eyes. "Uncle James kept them packed away. I think you're about the same size she was. They're old-fashioned now, I suppose, but they're clean and whole, until we can get you some proper things of your own." Hannah took the bundle with trembling hands. "Are you sure? My mother would have wanted them used, not just sitting in a trunk gathering dust. There's a wash basin and pitcher in the corner there. When you're ready, come down for breakfast." He paused at the door. "Take your time. There's no rush." After he left, Hannah poured water from the pitcher and did her best to wash away the grime of her journey. Then she unfolded the clothing he had brought. There was a simple cotton dress in a soft blue, a petticoat, stockings, and even undergarments, all carefully laundered and stored. The dress fit reasonably well, perhaps a bit loose, but it was whole and clean and made her feel human again. There was even a brush, and she worked it through her tangled brown hair until it fell in waves past her shoulders. When she finally descended the stairs, she found Colton and old Tom at the table. Both men stood when she entered, a courtesy that made her flush with unexpected pleasure. "Much better," old Tom said approvingly. "You've got color in your face again. Sit, eat. You need to rebuild your strength." Breakfast was eggs and bacon, fresh bread with butter, and coffee so strong it made her eyes water. As they ate, Colton outlined his plans for the day. "I need to ride into Sloan, get you a proper mattress and some essentials. Old Tom will be here working with the horses if you need anything. You should probably rest mostly, but if you feel up to it, you could look through the house and see what needs doing. I'm not the tidiest man, I'll admit." "I can do that," Hannah said eagerly. "I want to help. I need to do something." Colton studied her with those dawn-colored eyes. "Just don't overdo it. You've been through an ordeal. Your body needs time to recover." After breakfast, Colton saddled Justice and prepared to leave. Hannah walked out to the porch to see him off, suddenly nervous about being left in this new place, even though old Tom was nearby. Colton paused before mounting, turning to face her. "You're going to be fine," he said, reading her expression. "This is your home now for as long as you want it to be. Old Tom looks gruff, but he's harmless as a kitten, and I'll be back before sundown." "Colton," Hannah said, his name still feeling strange on her tongue. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "This isn't a debt. This is just what people ought to do for each other." Then he swung into the saddle with that easy grace she was already beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "But if you want to feel useful, the kitchen is a disaster, and I can't remember the last time anything was properly organized." He rode off with a wave, leaving Hannah on the porch feeling more grounded than she had since before her father took ill. Old Tom emerged from the barn, leading a beautiful chestnut mare. "This one's Copper," he said, stroking the horse's nose. "Sweetest disposition you'll ever find." Colton gentled her from a wild Mustang 2 years back. She was so skittish when she came in, she'd panic at shadows. Now look at her. patient as the day is long. Hannah approached slowly, extending her hand. Copper sniffed her fingers, then allowed Hannah to stroke her neck. The mare's coat was silky under her palm, warm in the morning sun. "He's got a gift for it," Old Tom continued. "Just like his uncle did. They say you can tell a man's character by how he treats animals. Colton treats them with respect and patience, never with force or anger. Same way he treats people, matter of fact." "How long have you known him?" Hannah asked, enjoying the simple pleasure of touching the horse. "Going on 3 years now. I was working at a ranch that went under near Virginia City. Colton and James offered me a place here when everyone else was just turning us old-timers out. I've been here since. Watched Colton grow from a grieving young man into someone who truly understands what running a ranch means." Old Tom gave her a knowing look. "He doesn't let just anyone in, you know. He's friendly enough in town, does business fair and square, but he keeps his walls up. You must have touched something in him yesterday." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He said he was paying forward what his uncle did for him." "That's part of it," Old Tom agreed. "But there's more to it. I saw his face when he carried you into the house last night. There was something there beyond just Christian charity." "We only just met," Hannah protested, though her heart was beating faster. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Old Tom said with a shrug. "Now I've got to get these horses worked. You go on and rest like Colton said. There's time enough for everything else." Hannah spent the morning exploring the house properly. It was well built and sturdy, clearly constructed by someone who knew what they were doing. The main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with the fireplace providing heat and a cooking surface. Upstairs were the 3 rooms she had seen, and out back were a washhouse and privy. The smaller cabin Old Tom occupied sat about 50 yards from the main house, giving him privacy while keeping him close. True to Colton's word, the kitchen was disorganized, with supplies scattered and no real system to anything. Hannah found herself naturally falling into the work of organizing, finding satisfaction in bringing order to chaos. She scrubbed dishes, sorted dry goods, swept floors, and generally made the place more livable. It felt good to work, to have purpose, to feel useful rather than like a burden. She was scrubbing the table when dizziness washed over her, making her grip the edge to stay upright. The world swam, and she realized she had overdone it. Her body was still recovering, still needed rest despite her mind's eagerness to prove her worth. She made her way to the rocking chair near the fireplace and sat down heavily, closing her eyes until the spinning stopped. That was how Colton found her when he returned in the late afternoon, dozing in the chair with cleaning rags still in her lap. The creak of the door woke her and she started, momentarily disoriented. "Sorry," Colton said, setting down the packages he carried. "Didn't mean to startle you. You've been busy, I see." Hannah looked around at the cleaned kitchen, feeling embarrassed. "I wanted to help, but I think I tired myself out." "I can see that," Colton said, but there was no reproach in his voice, only concern. "You need to be easier on yourself. You nearly died yesterday, Hannah. Recovery takes time." The sound of her name from his lips sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She watched as he began unloading his purchases. There was a rolled mattress, which must have cost a significant sum, bedding, fabric that looked like dress material, and various household goods. "You bought too much," Hannah said, standing despite her fatigue. "This must have cost a fortune." "A ranch that can't afford to properly house someone isn't worth running," Colton replied. "Besides, most of this is stuff we needed anyway. I've been making do with what Uncle James left behind, but there are things that need replacing." He pulled out a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "And I stopped at the general store. Mrs. Patterson helped me pick out some fabric she said would make good dresses. I hope I guessed your measurements right." Hannah took the parcel, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," Colton said simply. "You're part of this household now. That means making sure you have what you need." He picked up the mattress. "Come on, let's get this upstairs, then I need to tend to the horses before supper." Together they wrestled the mattress up the stairs and onto the bed frame. Colton showed her how to properly make up a bed, admitting with some chagrin that Uncle James had taught him, but he had gotten lazy about doing it right. As they worked side by side in the small room, Hannah became acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved with confident efficiency, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him. "Colton," she said as they smoothed the final blanket, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Aren't you worried about what people will say? A single man and a single woman living under the same roof. I heard old Tom mention it yesterday." Colton straightened, meeting her eyes across the bed. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. But the way I see it, people will talk no matter what we do. If we were doing something improper, that would be one thing. But we're not. You're a guest in my home, under my protection. Anyone who wants to make something ugly out of that can take it up with me directly." "I don't want to cause you trouble," Hannah said softly. "You're not causing anything," Colton assured her. "If anything, you're helping. This house has been too quiet since Uncle James passed. It's good to have another person here, someone to talk to besides old Tom and the horses." That evening, old Tom joined them for supper, and the three of them fell into an easy rhythm around the table. Old Tom was a gifted storyteller, sharing tales of his decades working ranches across Nevada and California. He made them laugh with stories of ornery cattle and stubborn mules, of cowboys with more courage than sense, of the wild early days before the railroad changed everything. "Things are different now," old Tom said, pushing back his empty plate. "More settled. In some ways better, in some ways worse. But the land is still hard, and it still takes hard people to work it. Good thing you two are young and strong." "I'm not very strong," Hannah admitted. "Not anymore. The last few years wore me down." "Strength isn't just about muscles," old Tom said wisely. "It's about getting back up when life knocks you down. You walked for days across the desert after losing your father. That's strength, girl. Real strength." After old Tom retired to his cabin, Hannah insisted on washing the dishes while Colton did a final check on the horses. When he returned, he found her drying the last plate, her movements slow with exhaustion. "You should head up to bed," he said gently. "You've done more than enough today." Hannah nodded, too tired to argue. She turned to face him, suddenly uncertain. "Good night, Colton. Good night, Hannah." She made it halfway to the stairs before turning back. "Colton, I just want you to know I've never felt safer than I do here. Thank you for that." She saw something shift in his expression, a warmth that went beyond simple kindness. "Sleep well," he said, his voice slightly rough. The days began to form a pattern. Hannah would wake early, help prepare breakfast, then tackle whatever household tasks needed doing while being careful not to exhaust herself. Colton worked with the horses, building the ranch's reputation for quality animals. Old Tom helped where he could and provided a steady stream of advice and stories. Slowly, Hannah's strength returned. The hollows in her cheeks filled out, color returned to her skin, and she began to move with more energy and purpose. 2 weeks after her arrival, a rider came to the ranch looking to buy a horse for his daughter. Colton showed him several animals, and Hannah watched from the porch as he demonstrated each horse's temperament and training. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, the way he communicated with the animals through touch and quiet words, never forcing, always guiding. The man, a merchant from Sloan named Mr. Davis, purchased a gentle mare for his daughter. As Colton was finalizing the sale, Mr. Davis noticed Hannah on the porch. "That your wife, Pierce?" he called out. Hannah felt her face flame red, but Colton's voice carried back steady and calm. "That's Hannah Sawyer. She runs my household and manages my books. Best decision I ever made, hiring her." Hiring her. The word stung a bit, though Hannah understood why he had framed it that way. It gave their arrangement respectability, a business justification that silenced potential gossip. After Mr. Davis left, Colton walked back to the house where Hannah still stood on the porch. "Sorry about that," he said. "I thought it best to give him an answer that would keep tongues from wagging." "It was smart," Hannah agreed, "though I haven't actually done any work with your books yet." "Well, maybe it's time you started," Colton said. "Uncle James kept ledgers, but I've been neglecting them. I can manage horses and fix fences, but numbers on a page tend to swim together after a while." That afternoon, Colton showed her to a small desk in the corner of the main room where ledgers and papers were stacked in disarray. Hannah settled in, and as she began sorting through the documents, she felt something click into place. This was work she understood, work her father had taught her. Numbers and organization had always made sense to her in a way that other things sometimes didn't. Over the next few days, she threw herself into organizing the ranch's finances. What she found concerned her. Colton was doing well enough with the horse sales, but he was paying too much for certain supplies, not charging enough for his expertise in training, and had several people who owed him money that he seemed to have forgotten about. One evening, she presented her findings. "Colton, you're leaving money on the table. Mr. Ferguson in town owes you for 2 horses from last spring, and you never collected. And the feed supplier is charging you 20% more than he charges the Johnson ranch down the valley." Colton looked at the ledger she showed him, then ran a hand through his hair. "I suppose I'm better with horses than with business." "That's why you have me now," Hannah said, surprised by her own boldness. "Let me handle this side of things. You focus on the horses. Between us, we can make this ranch truly profitable." Colton studied her, and Hannah became aware of how close they were sitting, both bent over the desk. "You really want to do this? It's not just about earning your keep. It's about building something," Hannah said, meeting his eyes. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. Let me help make that home stronger." Something passed between them in that moment, a current of understanding and connection that was more than gratitude, more than simple partnership. Colton reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "All right," he said softly. "We'll do this together." From that day forward, they were truly partners in running the ranch. Hannah took over all the bookkeeping, correspondence, and business negotiations. She was firm with suppliers who tried to overcharge and persistent in collecting debts. She also began to see ways to expand the business, suggesting that Colton offer training services to people who had bought horses elsewhere, but were having trouble gentling them. The first time someone brought a difficult horse for Colton to work with, Hannah watched the entire process. The horse was a young stallion, barely broken, that had developed a mean streak after being handled roughly by his previous owner. The new owner, a rancher named Patterson, was at his wits' end. "I'm about ready to shoot the beast," Patterson said. "But my wife says I should give him one more chance. She heard you work miracles." "No miracles," Colton said calmly. "Just patience and respect. Leave him with me for 2 weeks." Hannah watched over the following days as Colton worked with the stallion. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, even when the horse lashed out or refused to cooperate. He simply persisted, day after day, showing the animal that humans could be trusted, that not all touch meant pain. "How do you stay so patient?" Hannah asked one evening after a particularly difficult session where the stallion had nearly kicked Colton in the head. "Because I understand what it's like to be hurt and scared," Colton said, washing his hands at the pump. "After my family died, I was just like that horse. I lashed out at anyone who tried to get close. I didn't trust kindness because I was afraid it would be taken away. Uncle James showed me that not everyone leaves, that some people stay. That's what I'm showing this horse." Hannah felt her heart constrict. "Is that what you're showing me too?" Colton turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. "I'm not going anywhere, Hannah. I meant what I said that first day. Your family now. Family stays." The summer heat intensified, and with it came the hard work of maintaining the ranch. Fences needed mending, horses needed constant attention, hay needed to be cut and stored for winter. Hannah helped where she could, learning new skills. Old Tom taught her how to properly care for leather tack, how to identify different plants, and whether they were safe for horses to eat, how to read the weather by watching the sky. One afternoon in late July, a summer storm rolled in with dramatic speed. Hannah was hanging laundry when the first drops fell, huge and heavy. She rushed to gather the clothes, but the rain came too fast. Within minutes she was soaked through, laughing at the absurdity of it. She had just gathered the last shirt when she saw Colton running from the barn, equally drenched. They met on the porch, both dripping and breathless. Colton's shirt clung to him, and Hannah was suddenly very aware that her dress was plastered to her body. Their eyes met, and the laughter died away, replaced by something more intense. "You're soaked," Colton said, his voice rough. "So are you," Hannah replied, her heart racing. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility. But then old Tom called out from his cabin, asking if everything was secured, and the moment broke. Colton stepped back, and Hannah hurried inside to change into dry clothes, her hands shaking as she unbuttoned her dress. That night, she lay in bed listening to the rain on the roof and admitted to herself what had been growing for weeks now. She was falling in love with Colton Pierce. She didn't know when it had started, whether it was that first moment when he had offered her water in the desert, or later when she watched him work with the horses, or in the quiet evenings when they sat together going over the books while he asked her opinion and truly listened to her answers. But she was terrified to acknowledge it, even to herself. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he still saw her only as someone he had rescued, a charity case, a sister of sorts? The thought of losing this home, this safety, because of feelings she couldn't control was almost paralyzing. The following week, Colton needed to make a supply run to Carson City, a journey that would take 3 days there and back. He hesitated to leave, which Hannah found both endearing and frustrating. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Old Tom is here, and I'm perfectly capable of managing things for a few days." "I know you are," Colton said. "It's just that I've gotten used to having you around. The place won't feel right without you here." The admission made Hannah's pulse quicken. "It's only 3 days. I'll still be here when you get back." He studied her for a long moment. "Promise, promise," she said, confused by the intensity in his voice. He left early the next morning, and Hannah threw herself into work to avoid thinking too much about his absence. She organized the entire storage room, worked with old Tom to repair a section of fence, and spent an evening teaching herself to make the sourdough bread old Tom had mentioned was his favorite. On the second evening, as she was kneading dough, old Tom came in from his cabin and sat at the table watching her work. "You love him," he said bluntly. Hannah's hands stilled in the dough. "What? Don't play coy with me, girl. I've got eyes. I've watched how you look at each other, how you move around each other like you're dancing even when you're just doing chores. You love him, And unless I'm a blind fool, he loves you too. Hannah resumed needing something to do with her hands. Even if that were true, what difference would it make? He took me in out of charity. He sees me as someone to protect, not as a woman. Old Tom snorted. That boy hasn't looked at you like a sister for weeks now. He's just too honorable to say anything, worried that you'd feel obligated because he gave you a home. He doesn't want you to feel pressured. Then what am I supposed to do? Hannah asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. Tell him the truth when he gets back, Old Tom said. Life's too short and the frontier too hard to waste time on fear. If you love him, tell him. Let him make his own choice instead of making it for him. Hannah thought about Old Tom's words all through the next day. When she heard horse hooves that evening, her heart leaped into her throat. She walked out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, and watched as Colton rode up to the house. He looked tired from the hard ride, but his face lit up when he saw her. Told you I'd still be here, Hannah called out, trying to keep her voice light despite her racing heart. Colton dismounted and walked toward the porch, and there was something in his stride that seemed purposeful, determined. He climbed the steps and stood before her, close enough that she could see the dust from the road on his face, the weariness in his eyes, but also something else. Something that made her breath catch. Hannah, he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know you're under no obligation, no pressure at all. If you don't feel the same way, nothing has to change. You have a home here no matter what. Colton, she started, but he shook his head. Please let me say this before I lose my nerve. These past 2 months, having you here, it's been the best time of my life. Not just because you're helping with the ranch, though you are, more than you know, but because you're you. Because I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast, because everything is better when you're there. I missed you these past 3 days more than I thought possible, and on that ride back from Carson City, I realized something. He took a deep breath. I realized that I'm in love with you. Completely, terrifyingly in love with you. And I know I have no right to feel this way, no right to burden you with it when you're still finding your feet, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. You foolish man, she said, her voice breaking. Did you really think I could live here beside you, watch you work, talk with you every evening, and not fall in love with you too? Colton's eyes widened. You do. Of course I do, Hannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. I love you, Colton Pierce. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you are with the horses and with Old Tom and with me. I love that you took me in when you had no reason to trust me. I love everything about you, and I have been terrified to tell you because I thought you saw me as someone you had to take care of, not as a woman you could love. Hannah, Colton breathed, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. You survived things that would have broken most people. And yes, I want to take care of you, but not because you're weak, because you're precious to me, because loving someone means wanting to see them safe and happy. Then kiss me, Hannah whispered. Please, kiss me. Colton lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Hannah's hands came up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. It was perfect, everything she had dreamed about during those lonely nights when she admitted her feelings to herself. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short while, but I've never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Hannah. Let me be your family forever, not just in words, but in truth. Yes, Hannah said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. I've been yours since the moment you gave me water in the desert and told me I had family again." From his cabin, old Tom's whoop of joy echoed across the yard, making them both laugh. They had not been as discreet as they thought, apparently. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. They set the wedding for early September, giving them time to make arrangements, but not so long that the waiting would be unbearable. Hannah used the fabric Colton had bought, and with help from Mrs. Patterson in town, sewed herself a simple but lovely wedding dress in cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Word spread quickly through Sloan that Colton Pierce was getting married, and the reaction was almost entirely positive. The people of the town had watched Colton build his ranch and reputation with respect for his integrity and skill. That he was marrying his bookkeeper, the young woman he had taken in when she had nothing, only increased the community's regard for him. The night before the wedding, as tradition dictated, Hannah stayed with the Pattersons in town while Colton remained at the ranch. Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 40s, helped Hannah with final preparations for the dress and for the simple reception that would follow the ceremony. "You're a lucky woman," Mrs. Patterson said as she adjusted the lace on Hannah's dress. "Colton Pierce is a good man, through and through. My husband says he's the most honest person he's dealt with in all his years of business." "I know how lucky I am," Hannah said softly. "A few months ago, I was dying in the desert with nothing and no one. Now I have everything." "He's lucky too," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Don't sell yourself short, dear. You've done wonders with that ranch from what I hear. The two of you together are stronger than either would be alone." That's what a good marriage is. The wedding took place in the small church in Sloan on a perfect September morning. The sky was a brilliant blue, and a cool breeze provided relief from the lingering summer heat. Hannah wore her cream dress with wildflowers in her hair that old Tom had picked that morning. Colton wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by the circuit preacher who passed through Sloan once a month. Hannah's hands shook as she said her vows, but Colton's grip was steady, anchoring her. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the small congregation sniffled into their handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors contributing food and drink. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard as the sun set. Hannah danced with Colton, with old Tom, with Mr. Patterson and several other men from town. But always her eyes returned to her husband, still marveling that the word applied to him now. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Colton pulled her aside. "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Pierce?" Hannah smiled at her new name. "I've been ready since the moment I said yes." They bid good night to the last guests, and old Tom tactfully announced he would be sleeping in the barn that night to give them privacy. Then Colton took Hannah's hand and led her upstairs to his room, which was now their room. The room had been cleaned and prepared, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a vase on the dresser. Colton closed the door behind them and turned to face Hannah, suddenly looking unsure. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. This is your choice always." Hannah stepped close to him, reaching up to cup his face. "I love you, Colton. I'm your wife now. I want this. I want you completely." She kissed him, and he responded with a passion that had been restrained during their courtship, but now was free to express itself. His hands moved to the buttons of her dress, and she helped him, both of them learning each other with tenderness and growing confidence. Their wedding night was everything it should be, a consummation of love and commitment, tender and passionate and profound. Afterward, Lying in Colton's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Hannah felt a peace she had never known. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Colton asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." "Hannah," he said, tilting her face up so he could see her eyes in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You saved me too. I was just going through the motions before you came. You gave me purpose again, gave me something more than just survival. You gave me a future worth building." The autumn passed in a glow of newlywed happiness. Hannah and Colton worked together seamlessly, their partnership in business flowing naturally into their partnership in all things. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Colton's reputation for training difficult horses grew, bringing in steady income, while Hannah's careful financial management ensured they were prepared for the lean winter months. In November, Hannah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be certain before telling Colton, choosing Christmas morning to give him the news. They had spent a quiet Christmas Eve with old Tom, exchanging small gifts and sharing a meal. But Christmas morning was just for them, and as they lay in bed watching the sunrise, Hannah took Colton's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby," she said simply. "Our baby. Due sometime in the summer, I think." Colton's expression cycled through shock, joy, and awe in rapid succession. "Truly, we're going to have a child, truly," Hannah confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Colton sat up, pulling her into his arms. "Hannah, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A baby, our baby." He pulled back to look at her, his hand gentle on her stomach. "We're going to be a family." "We already are a family," Hannah reminded him. "This little one just makes it bigger." The winter was hard, as winters in Nevada could be, but the ranch was prepared. They had plenty of hay stored, the buildings were sound, and the three of them worked together to keep the horses safe and healthy through the cold months. Hannah's pregnancy progressed normally, though she tired more easily and had to adjust her work accordingly. Colton became even more protective, insisting she not overdo things, while old Tom took on additional chores without complaint. In the quiet winter evenings, Colton would sit with his hand on Hannah's growing belly, talking to the baby about the horses, about the ranch, about the life they were preparing. Hannah would watch him with such love it almost hurt, still amazed that this was her life now. Spring brought the birth. Hannah's labor began on a warm June afternoon while she was hanging laundry. The first contraction caught her by surprise, and she gripped the clothesline, breathing through it. By the time Colton came in from the corrals, the contractions were regular and strong. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to help with the birth, and Colton rode into town to fetch her while old Tom stayed with Hannah. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Colton paced outside the bedroom, old Tom trying to keep him calm, both men feeling helpless in the face of Hannah's pain. Finally, as the sun was climbing toward noon, a baby's cry pierced the air. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Pierce. A healthy baby boy, and your wife did beautifully." Colton nearly knocked her over in his haste to get to Hannah. She was propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Colton approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Hannah's arms. The child was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny features that were somehow already recognizable. Colton reached out with one finger to touch the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers immediately curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Colton breathed. He's absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Hannah asked. I was thinking maybe James, after your uncle. Colton's eyes filled with tears. James Sawyer Pierce, he said, if that's all right with you. James for my uncle, Sawyer for your father, connecting all the family that brought us to this moment. It's perfect, Hannah agreed, tears streaming down her own face. Old Tom was permitted to visit once Hannah had rested, and the old cowboy's face crumpled with emotion when he held little James. He's a fine boy, he said gruffly. Strong like his father, smart like his mother. He's going to do great things. The months after James's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Colton proved to be a devoted father, walking the baby when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every spare moment simply watching his son. Hannah recovered well from the birth and found herself settling into motherhood with more confidence than she had expected. On James's first birthday, they held a celebration at the ranch. Many of their neighbors attended, bringing gifts for the baby and marveling at how much he had grown. The Pattersons' daughter, now a teenager, offered to help watch James, giving Hannah and Colton a chance to dance together for the first time since the wedding. Can you believe it's been almost 3 years since that day in the desert? Hannah asked as they swayed to the music. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Colton said. Other times it feels like you've been here forever, like I can't remember what life was like before you. It was lonely, Hannah said, for both of us, but we're not lonely anymore. No, Colton agreed, pulling her closer. We're not. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for the wild roses that grew near the creek on the property. Old Tom remained with them, growing older but no less essential to the family. He taught James to ride as soon as the boy was big enough to sit a horse, the same way he had taught Colton years before. The sight of the old cowboy leading James around the corral on a gentle mare became one of Hannah's favorite sights. When James was 5 and Rose was 2, a hard winter struck Nevada. Snow fell heavier than anyone could remember, and several ranches in the area lost livestock. The Pierce Ranch weathered the storm well, thanks to careful preparation and the hard work of everyone involved. But old Tom, now in his late 70s, developed a cough that wouldn't go away. By spring, it was clear the cough was serious. Old Tom grew weaker, sleeping more, eating less. The doctor from Sloan came out and was honest with them. It was pneumonia, and at his age, there was little that could be done. Old Tom faced his approaching death with the same straightforward acceptance he had brought to life. One evening in early April, as the snow was finally melting, he asked Colton and Hannah to bring the children to his cabin. James and Rose climbed onto his bed, careful not to jostle him, and old Tom spoke to them in his familiar gruff voice. "You two are the luckiest children in Nevada," he told them. "You've got parents who love each other and love you. You've got a home and a future. Remember that when things get hard, because they will sometimes, but family is what gets you through." James, old enough to understand that old Tom was very sick, asked, "Are you going to die?" "Yes, boy," old Tom said honestly. "Soon, I think. But that's all right. I've lived a good long life, longer than I had any right to expect, and these last years with your family have been the best of all. I'm not afraid." That night, with Colton and Hannah keeping vigil at his bedside, old Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to the spot where Uncle James was buried. Colton carved a wooden marker that read, "Tom Harrison, friend and family, died as he lived, with dignity and grace. The loss hit harder than any of them expected. Old Tom had been part of the fabric of their lives, and his absence left a hole that took time to adjust to. But life on a ranch doesn't stop for grief, and they moved forward, carrying his memory with them. James grew into a lanky boy who had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Rose was more interested in the business side, often sitting with Hannah as she worked on the books, asking endless questions about how money worked and why some supplies cost more than others. When Rose was 6, Hannah gave birth to twins, boys they named Matthew and Daniel. The house that had once seemed so empty now rang with children's laughter. Colton expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available, building their operation into one of the most respected in the region. But he never forgot where he had come from, or how Uncle James had given him a chance when he had nothing. Several times over the years, he and Hannah took in young people who needed help, offering them work and a place to stay, paying forward the kindness that had saved both their lives. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Colton took Hannah up to the hill where old Tom and Uncle James were buried. It had become a favorite spot, with a view that stretched for miles across the Nevada landscape. The children were with a neighbor, giving them a rare afternoon alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Colton asked as they sat on the hillside, his arm around her shoulders. "Saying yes to me that day, taking a chance on a cowboy and his run-down ranch." Hannah leaned into him, still fitting against his side as perfectly as she had 20 years ago. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything, Colton. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. How could I regret any of that?" "I was so scared that day I proposed," Colton admitted. "Scared you'd say no, scared you'd only say yes because you felt obligated. Scared I'd somehow ruin what we had by wanting more." "I was scared too," Hannah said, "but I've learned that the best things in life require a leap of faith. You took a leap of faith when you offered me water in the desert and told me I had family. I took one when I said yes to being your wife. And look what we built from those leaps." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Below them, the ranch spread out, prosperous and thriving. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house where their children were growing up. Horses grazed peacefully in the corrals. Everything they had built together was visible from this spot. "I love you," Colton said, turning to kiss her temple. "I've loved you for 20 years, and I'll love you for 20 more, and 20 more after that if God gives us the time." "I love you too," Hannah replied. "Forever and always." As the years continued to pass, their children grew and found their own paths. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same gift for working with horses that his father had. He married a young woman from Reno, and they gave Colton and Hannah their first grandchildren. Rose, true to her nature, moved to Carson City to work as a bookkeeper for a large mercantile company, though she visited often and always with stories of her adventures in the growing city. The twins, Matthew and Daniel, stayed closer to home, working the ranch and eventually buying land of their own nearby. Colton and Hannah grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies showing the wear of hard years, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together in the evenings, still worked side by side, still found joy in each other's company. The ranch had grown beyond anything they had imagined that first day, now employing several workers and supplying horses across Nevada and into California. One evening, when Colton was 68 and Hannah was 63, they sat on the porch watching another Nevada sunset. Their grandchildren played in the yard, 7 of them now, ranging in age from 2 to 15. Hannah's hand was in Colton's, their fingers intertwined in the familiar way of decades together. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Hannah asked. "When I told you I had no family, I said you did now," Colton replied. "I said I was your family from that day on." "You kept that promise," Hannah said, squeezing his hand. "Every single day for 45 years you've kept that promise." "It was the easiest promise I ever made," Colton said, "and the most important." "Look at what came from it," Hannah said, gesturing to the grandchildren, to the ranch, to everything they had built. "All of this started because a cowboy showed kindness to a dying girl in the desert." "No," Colton corrected gently. "All of this started because that girl was strong enough to keep walking when she had every reason to give up. Because she survived long enough for me to find her. You saved yourself, Hannah. I just gave you a place to land." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly they fit together. "We saved each other," she said. "That's the truth of it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, and the children were called in for supper, Colton and Hannah remained on the porch for a few more moments, treasuring the peace and contentment that had been hard-won, but was no less precious for it. They had started with nothing but each other, two lonely people finding connection in the vast Nevada desert. From that foundation, they had built a life, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The abandoned girl who had collapsed in the dust outside Sloan had found more than rescue that day. She had found purpose, partnership, and a love that would define the rest of her life. And the cowboy who had offered water and family to a stranger had found the same. Together, they had proved that family was not just about blood. It was about choice, about commitment, about showing up for each other day after day, year after year. It was about building something lasting in an often harsh and unforgiving world. As they finally rose to join their family for supper, their hands still clasped together, Colton and Hannah carried with them the knowledge that their story, which had begun in desperation and survival, had become something beautiful. It was a story they would tell their grandchildren, and those grandchildren would tell their own children, a story of how love and kindness could transform lives and create something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would continue, maintained by James and his family. The house that had once held just one lonely cowboy now rang with life and laughter. The land that had seemed so empty was now rich with memories and meaning. And at the center of it all was the simple truth that had started everything. A cowboy who believed in family and a girl who needed one, coming together at exactly the right moment in exactly the right place. Years later, when Colton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, Hannah held his hand and whispered her gratitude for every day they had shared. She told him about the grandchildren who were thriving, about James expanding the ranch even further, about Rose's promotion to head bookkeeper, about the twins who had bought the land to the south and were raising cattle alongside the horses. She told him he could rest easy, that the family he had started with a simple act of kindness was strong and would endure. Hannah lived another 8 years after Colton's death, years spent surrounded by family and love, years that brought great-grandchildren and new stories to tell. When her time came, she went peacefully, sitting in her favorite rocking chair on the porch, looking out over the land she and Colton had worked together for so many decades. They were buried side by side on the hill next to Old Tom and Uncle James, their markers simple but clear. Colton Pierce, beloved husband, father, grandfather who lived what he believed, and Hannah Sawyer Pierce, beloved wife, mother, grandmother who was saved and saved others in return. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one knowing the story of how it began. They knew about the girl who nearly died in the desert and the cowboy who gave her water and family. They knew about the partnership that had built everything they enjoyed. They knew that family was not always about blood, but always about love and commitment and showing up when someone needed you most. And on summer evenings, when the grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered on that same porch where Colton and Hannah had spent so many hours, they could almost feel the presence of those who had come before. They could sense the love that had built this place, the determination that had sustained it, and the faith that had allowed two lonely people to take a chance on each other and create something that would outlast them both. The abandoned girl had found her family that day in the desert outside Sloan, Nevada, in the summer of 1878. And in finding it, she had helped create a legacy that would endure for generations, proving that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them, and that kindness shown to a stranger can ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict or measure. The story that began with dust and desperation ended with love and legacy, with a family that stretched across generations and would continue long into the future. It was a story of the Wild West, of survival and strength, but more than that, it was a story of what truly matters. The connections we forge, the people we choose to love, and the families we build not from blood but from choice, commitment, and unwavering faith in each other. In the end, that was the greatest gift Colton had given Hannah that day in the desert, not just the water that saved her body but the words that saved her soul. You do now. I'm your family from this day on. Words that had proved true for 45 years of marriage and would remain true forever in the legacy they left behind. Words that had transformed two lonely individuals into the foundation of something lasting and beautiful, something that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come.